What's up, everybody? Welcome to Move the Sticks. DJ, Bucky, Rhett, as we get our recap in, a little draft recap in. Guys, Buck, starting with you. How we doing, man?
Good, DJ. Great job by you and the crew on the ground in Detroit. Rhett and I held it down with a few of the other guys. It was a long, exhausting weekend, but it was one that was really compelling, made for really good TV in terms of just watching the offensive-centric draft go, the quarterbacks go in the top 12,
Wow.
and then just watching some teams take advantage of the blue chippers falling down the charts because it was such a run on offensive players and quarterbacks early.
What'd you think, Rhett?
Yeah, I think I've had that kind of question, as we all kind of, assess with our different platforms and the way in which we're talking about the draft. Like that was kind of the question, it's like, all right, is it a state of, the way football is being played these days and that we got so many of the offensive guys? And I'm like, well, if there was better defensive players, they would have been taken in the top 10. That's just, that's kind of the way it went, and that's the way it goes. And, the league obviously valued them a little bit lower than everybody else, but that's what happens when you get 6 QBs and a bunch of offensive linemen. And then we got the run on receivers as well. So I love that we actually have some cold, hard data points to talk about here after about 1 million mock drafts and projections. So let's rock and roll.
Yeah, I want to hit Bucky up on this one first before we get into all the recap here. But I had a assistant GM of a team. First of all, two. One reached out to me literally a couple hours before the draft and said, "I think we're going to get 6 quarterbacks in the first 13 picks." Like, he was pretty confident about that, okay, interesting. If that happens, this is crazy. It ended up being 6 in the first 12 picks. But the second one was after the first round. I was talking to a GM who I talked to all the time, or assistant GM I talked to all the time, and he was like, it was really helpful, all the conversations we had kind of scrimmaging this stuff out of how this thing could fall and how this thing could go. And I thought back to what I love so much about this platform and what we get to do on Move the Sticks is that we get to think through all this stuff before it happens. And Buck, I don't know if you thought the same way I did, but as the draft was unfolding, I went, we kind of nailed this when we did the offense only first round mock draft. And yeah. Bucky and I, we got through the 30-second.
Oh yeah, I remember.
I got more names. Like, we can keep going. We did the defensive only mock draft, and I'm not kidding you. It was like the 8th or 9th pick, and Bucky and I are like, "What? Oh my gosh!" Whoa. Like, we had like Samerstill was like he was like the 12th pick or something like that. Like, we just ran. It was gone. We're like, man, this is a lopsided draft.
It was a lopsided draft, and DJ is one of those things because it seems like a silly exercise to do a one-sided draft, but what it does is it lets you know where the depth of the talent is. And going through that first round on offense, man, we just could have rattled off so many more names at the end. And then we get to the defensive drafts, and we're pulling guys that, we have on our respective sheets is like 3rd and 4th round players.
Yeah,
they were now having to put in the first round of a mock draft. So when you get to draft day and you're not even paying attention to the run, right? You're just like, okay, this player, that player. You're like, man, you know what? We haven't had a defensive player picked. And so you're down to 14 and 15, and now you're like, wow. And then you go through it, and you talked about it, 23 offensive players picked in the first in the first round.
Yeah.
But not only that, the other thing that stood out to me, DJ, was looking at the first round and the positions. We always talk about the premier positions, like what are the premium positions on a team. And so we talk about 8 offensive tackles to come off the board, right? So that 7 wide receivers coming off the board, 6 quarterbacks. And so we're like, all right, well, here we go. We talk about a league that is about passers, pass protectors, playmakers, and pass rushers. Like, it's all laid out in the way that the draft came off. And so to me, it just continues to talk about the changing dynamics of the league. And if you're not up on it, you can get left behind.
Yeah. We had lost Rhett for a second. I think he's back with us. Rhett, are you up and running over there? Maybe not, because he's not replying here. So I'll take it from here. What's he doing, Buck? What is he doing?
He's just trying to figure it out. He's just lost. He's trying to figure out. I do have more on that, DJ, like when it comes to the marquee positions. So I pulled out the research packet. The first 3 rounds, we always talk about the core players. And so we talked about passers, pass protectors, pass rushers, and playmakers. So 18 offensive tackles selected in the first 3 rounds, 16 wide receivers selected in the first 3 rounds, 14 cornerbacks and 11 edge rushers selected in that span. And then you saw like 10 defensive tackles. So when you combine the D tackles and the edge rushers, because what we've seen in free agency, because you've talked about this, the pass rushing defensive tackles, you got to pay a whole lot of money for those guys on the open market. And you're just seeing that those 5 positions are now the marquee spots that the money is going to, and also where people are putting the investment, the draft capital, going to those marquee spots.
Yeah, I also think there's just some drafts where you're going to be light in some other areas. Like I just remember, last year, I was baffled by the fact that you had some teams that had at least a semi-tight end need that didn't address it. And I'm like, this is the best tight end draft we've ever had. You're going to get tight ends in the 5th and 6th round last year, and it proved out that are going to be really, really good quality players. And then you flip around to the next year, and it's like we fall off a cliff at that position. So to me, being able to identify the strength of a draft and to be able to even get on the back end of that, you're so much value. You're getting so much value, and there's no guarantees of what that's going to look like in future drafts. So I thought that was fascinating there, Buck.
I want to bring Rhett in on this because we'll eventually have the Michael Penix conversation. But DJ, you brought up something that made me think about this. So you talked about being able to look ahead. So we've all worked with teams, and part of the thing that you do is this year's class, but you also know what's coming down the pipe. I do wonder, the run on quarterbacks early, is that an indictment on the 2025 quarterback class and maybe what these teams are projecting out? Hey, what's in 2025? And maybe what's even in 2026 when it comes to signal callers.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like you think about that, you're looking at what Quinn Ewers from Texas, look at a kid from Miami who's kind of thought about going to the league, Cam Ward and
Sanders.
Sanders, be a part of that. And now, you guys know this, but I've heard it from a couple of GMs that you bring the scouts back in, a little bit closer to the end of the process, and you start to get their thoughts, preliminary thoughts on the 25 class, because they've already been into that tape a little bit, right? At this point, some of those guys, they have kind of a feel, been into some of those schools. They've seen, some of these guys play a little bit, looking at other prospects. So, I mean, you do need to have some context there on what's coming down the pipeline. Ultimately, you still want the value kind of regardless, but it's good to have an idea at that point.
Yeah, I'll push back on that from the standpoint, and I've had this conversation with the team, and I had this conversation with the general manager, who then had to have this conversation with his owner, because it was like, well, doesn't look like, this is the year to do it because of next year. And then while you guys were having that discussion, I went back through and pulled it up. Like, you can go back through the years. Jaden Daniels this year, perfect example. Nobody talked about him. JJ McCarthy before the year, nobody was talking about him like this. Anthony Richardson.
Joe Burrow?
Yeah, Anthony Richardson the year before this. Yeah, Joe Burrow you just mentioned. You can go back through, obviously, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Joe Burrow you mentioned, Jalen Hurts going as high as he did, Daniel Jones. Like, we can go Baker Mayfield being the first pick. Like, every year these guys pop up. There's going to be quarterbacks every year at some point in time. Every now and then you're going to run into the Kenny Pickett year where, like, or the oh my gosh, why am I going to draw
the Geno Smith year?
Geno Smith,
exactly. EJ Manuel, that's what I was thinking of, like that year, where those are going to happen, but those are rare. Those are like once every 7-8 years. But I want to get to the Atlanta thing in a minute, and we'll get there. Everybody's been buzzing about it. I think it's easily the most discussed pick of the draft and decision and the philosophy around it, and we can delve all into that. But I do want to start up at the very top and just kind of unload some stuff that, when the draft's going, you don't get much time to get all that stuff out. And there's some stuff that we gather that, you don't share, and then you're waiting until the draft comes, and we can kind of let some of that stuff out of the bag here. But so Caleb goes 1. We talked a bunch about that. Decision been made forever. Put that one to bed. The first decision of the draft was 2 with Washington. And I had a chance to talk with Adam Peters about what he liked about Jaden Daniels a day or two before the draft. And I said, I want to kind of go through a couple of these guys. And so when we got to Jaden Daniels, some of the things that he said that I found fascinating was, one of the things he mentioned was, like, it hasn't been easy for him. And that's a good thing. He's like, he's had to go through the grind. He said he's earned every single thing that he's gotten. And, being at the facility every day at 5 a.m., the fact that receivers then started coming in with him at 5 a.m., Like, you've earned it. You've shown the work ethic to be able to grind through this thing. Like, all that stuff. He's like, he's not the loudest guy in the world. He's not going to be the loudest guy in the room, but his work ethic is so off the charts that everybody else kind of falls in line with him from that standpoint. I don't know how many people, knew that about him or appreciated that about him, which I thought was fascinating. Then when we got to talking about him as a player, I asked him, I said, what did you learn? What did you learn most about Purdy? Like, you guys obviously hit on Purdy, and what was the lesson you took away from that? And he said, at the end of the day, like, who quarterbacks the best? He was like in quarterbacking, meaning in the pocket, on time, getting through progressions, getting you in the right play call, making the right checks, protecting the football, understanding down and distance, like all those factors, the clock, all that stuff. Like, that's quarterbacking. It's not just throwing, it's not just running, it's not being an athlete, it's actually quarterbacking. He said, we learned with Purdy was really good at quarterbacking, and then he also had the ability to make a man miss if necessary a few times a game, and enough athleticism. We've talked about that a lot on here. Just enough. If you're going to give him some 3 yards, he can take it, and enough where you can escape and make some plays. But the gist of it was quarterbacking, and they felt like just him doing the quarterbacking stuff that they were in love with. And then you combine that with, and this is the exact phrase that he used, there's something about being able to, in one play with your legs or your arm, the ability to flip a field. He's like, the explosives, like he can give you in the NFL where it's so hard to string together drives. He can flip the field in one play with his arm or with his legs, Buck.
Okay. So there's so much good stuff that Adam shared with you about Jayden Daniels. I will say this, like going all the way back to his time at Arizona State. When he left Arizona State, I talked to people that were on the staff there, and no one expected him to become what he became at LSU. Like, it was almost like not quite a good riddance, but kind of like a shoulder shrug when he left. So then he goes to LSU. And when he picked LSU, DJ, I'll be the first to admit, having known Jayden from watching him at Elite 11, I was like, man, I don't know what this marriage is going to be like with him and Brian Kelly. We all know Brian Kelly. We all like Brian Kelly, but Brian Kelly coaches hard. And I was like, man, I don't know if he can do it. And Jayden not only voluntarily went there, he went there to win a job, stayed there, and then he eventually flourished. So what that told me is, this is a guy that you can put anywhere. He can deal with any type of coaching and find a way to get to the other side. Then you hear the reports about him coming in at 5 a.m., how the receivers and teammates liked him and loved him, stuff that was completely counter to what you heard at Arizona State. Then you begin to think like, hey, man, this guy is a little different. I talked to him over the summer at an event, and he has a maturity about him. And I know people knock some of these quarterbacks on their age because of the transfers. But DJ, at that position, when Adam talks about quarterbacking, it takes some experience and some maturity, in my mind, to get to that point where you can handle all of that and keep everybody on the same page. So it is interesting that Adam Peters and the Commanders really raved about those parts of Jayden Daniels.
And I'm also kind of interested, guys, in DJ. I don't know if you had any, intel on this, but how the Patriots then viewed kind of the flip side, right, for Drake May, who had been through some hard stuff this last year, but man, had really, passed with flying colors in 2022, and then kind of got the flip side of the Daniels Burrow bump, right?
Yeah, to me, interesting things on that. The efforts made there were substantial to get that pick. So I know it had been put out there that New England, I mean, they didn't feel like they had a serious offer that would, that they would contemplate moving with the third pick. They were not trading the third pick in hindsight, because the offers that I know of that got sent in there were very substantial at the end. Like, it was a lot, like a massive overpay in terms of the chart, like lots of good stuff. It wasn't a combination of second, third round picks. Let's just put it that way. And they stuck and were able to pick there. And one of the things to me that was telling there was, I think not only do they love, the size, the athleticism, the tools, all that stuff, which to me matches the division, right? We talk about building your team to match your city, to match your division. That's a division that's run by Josh Allen. You're playing in some cold weather there with the Jets and the Bills, and obviously playing your games in Foxborough. Big, rugged, physical guy. So you've got all that stuff. But I also think that going in there and the juice and the energy that he brought. I think that sold him. Like, like that was kind of the tipping point there. If we were kind of a defensive team right now, an offense in search of an identity, I think and not a shot at Mac, but I think Mac could bring kind of some of the bravado and the confidence, but didn't necessarily have the tools behind the bravado and the confidence to match, if that makes any sense to you. Whereas I think Drake has all that stuff, and then he is like it just oozes with energy and juice and passion and excitement, but not in a turn you off kind of way, kind of more into like this guy loves ball as a ball of energy.
So I think a lot of the stuff that helps Drake is his basketball background, right? So growing up in it, Luke doing it, his brother Bo doing it. Like his dad was a 3-sport standout in high school. He's been around it. In fact, his dad started his granddad is affiliated with the Charlotte Sonics, an AAU program that had Jeff McGinnis and Jerry Stackhouse and all those guys come through when my dad had AAU team facing them in the finals all the time. And what I can say is when you've been on that AAU circuit or you've been in that basketball world, you got to be able to connect with a lot of different personalities. So when I see Drake show up to the press conference with his brothers and his girlfriend, and he talks about when you get me, you get them. To me, that was like everything. Yeah. And then Rhett had talked about the messages that his brothers left on this stuff. To me, I think he just has it. Like, and I don't know if anyone, you guys heard about him playing 4-on-4 the night before the draft up in Detroit. His buddies getting there. To me, DJ, that is what it's about. The Carolina people just talk about how he's just that guy. He just has that infectious personality where you just want to be around him. And I just think about when he came on the podcast, and he's yes, sir, no, sir, all that, which is great. But his ability to connect with his teammates, we always talk about quarterback being like a leadership position. But it's one where you got to connect. It's one thing to lead. It's another thing. You got to connect to really lead people. He has that. And I think when Elliott Wolf talked about he was the only quarterback who showed up each and every week at the podium, win or loss, speaks to his leadership ability and his professionalism and maturity. That is significant.
There's some self-awareness there too. There's some loyalty there too. We know the potential offers that he was given to leave UNC and go to an even bigger, program and ended up staying there.
Whoa. We're not going to talk about bigger. We're not going to talk about bigger. We talk about
sorry, better. Maybe I'll say better. Yeah. Maybe I'll say better.
We're not going to talk about bigger.
Yeah.
Wealthier.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's it. No, but look, and I remember talking to him in the summer and just kind of being like, hey man, you've been a big man on campus now since, the last couple of months since the season. And, people are already talking about you being, number 1, number 2 pick in the draft. Like, do you get any time to kind of be a student and enjoy? He's like, not really, but it's all right. Live with my brother. Like, we talk ball all the time. We play ball all the time. Like, it's all about ball for me. And so you combine that with the tools, obviously, which are pretty important prerequisite, and you feel good about a face of the franchise that you're getting here, which is also part of the equation.
No doubt. Let's get through a couple more of these picks, and we'll kind of get through the top 10. Then we'll go have some big picture teams that we liked and such. Quickly, 4. Said it at the time. There's a time for quantity, then there's a time for quality. And Buck always uses this line when we're talking about championship teams. At the end of the day, you're still going to need those 8 to 12 blues. You got to have the blue chip players. You win championships in this league by having a core group of elite players. The Cardinals is starting to establish a little bit of roster depth. They had all these extra picks. They were able to get more depth. They needed blue chip players. There was no way they could get cute and trade off of Marvin Harrison Jr. You got a blue chip player at a valuable position, and it's a need for your roster. Stick and pick. They took him. Number 5, the Chargers. Then I'll get you guys' thoughts on these. Rip through these real quick. We told everybody that had ears to listen for months and months and months. This is not we're not trying to fake you out. Jim Harbaugh is not trying to create a diversion from every time he got before a microphone, whether it was at his introductory press conference, the combine, owners meetings, pre-draft conference call. All the guy talked about was offensive line and running the football and protecting Justin Herbert. It was not a smokescreen. This is meat and potatoes. This is steak and milk. Like, this is not a guy who's trying to trick anybody. This is exactly who we are. This is exactly what we do. I said it on we said it on here before. I said it on the draft. This is him going to Stanford and saying Oregon and USC and all the high flying stuff. That's great. I'm not chasing 5-star receivers. I'm not chasing 5-star DBs. I'm going to go sign every offensive lineman and tight end that I can possibly find, and we're going to run it down your throats. Like, that is his core philosophy. He did the same thing with Ohio State. It took a while to get there, but that's eventually what he got to, and they ended up, beating him up. So that was not a surprise. And then at 6, we had said through the whole process, I don't believe that they are a J.J. McCarthy team. They are a Drake May team. They're going to try like crazy to get from 6 to 3. If they can't get Drake May, I think they're going to be comfortable. And it's not just with Daniel Jones. I believe Drew Lock has got a really good shot of winning that job. He's going to be in the mix there. So they were comparing, Daniel Jones and Drew Lock, and I would emphasis on Drew Lock, to the quarterbacks that were going to be there. And I think the line for them was Drake May. After that, they weren't taking that. And I thought the Minnesota Vikings were smart and correctly reading that situation and not mortgaging to go up and get J.J. McCarthy. They held their water, paid a little insurance to get it up one spot at 10 and ended up getting them. So those are my thoughts on kind of, those top six picks. And obviously 7, once we got to the Titans, they were going to take one of the top 2 tackles. That wasn't a mystery either.
So 2 things with both of the teams. Well, 2 of the teams that you mentioned. One with the Chargers. Chargers staying true to the identity Jim Harbaugh telegraphed it. He said, this is what it's going to be. Now with Tennessee Titans, we all know Rand Carthon, right? Rand Carthon is a believer in physicality and toughness. And even though they brought Brian Callahan in and the things that they did in Cincinnati, Rand Carthon stayed true to what he believes wins football, and that is at the line of scrimmage. We talk about being able to get an offensive tackle early, coming back later, getting a defensive tackle up front to be able to bully people. That is how the Tennessee Titans want to do it, because as much as we want to build it around Will Levis and allow him to do his thing, at some point, the best way to protect him is a really good offensive line and a really good defense that shrinks the game and doesn't put so much on them. So teams that were trying to stay, I would say, true to the brand, to me, that stood out in the top 10.
Yeah, I'd say that. And then I'd say a theme that we kind of watched throughout the draft, especially for the teams that took quarterbacks in the first round, the first 12 picks, went out and supported their quarterbacks later on. None bigger and better than the Chicago Bears, who, after all the talk, maybe it's a tackle, maybe it's an edge. No. It's a wide receiver. We're going to put this dude in the best possible situation to succeed, better than we've seen a number 1 pick at quarterback get dropped into, I don't know, in recent history. DJ, I can't think of another one that's gone 1 overall and has been in a better spot with talent around him than Caleb Williams, especially after the Rome Odunze pick.
Yeah, no, and then we would scream that from the mountaintops. I kept hearing edge rusher.
No.
This will be a tackle, or this will be a wide receiver. But I was happy to see him get a Odunze. I was texting with a buddy in that personnel department saying, man, look, it's my opinion, take it, leave it, whatever it's worth. But I'm like, it's my favorite kid in the draft. I mean, you just throw him in there, and someone who's going to get a master's class in route running from Keenan Allen every day at practice. It's like you couldn't have a better setup for him. We'll circle back to, we're going to take a break after 10. We'll circle back to 8 because I know we've got something to chew on there. But then you get to 10. Obviously, we mentioned Minnesota. They get J.J. McCarthy. They trade up there 1 spot. The Jets trade back 1 spot. They had with the receivers gone and off the board. I thought that made their decision easy. It's a tackle. It's insurance. And then even if he doesn't win the starting job, which I don't anticipate Fashanu will, I mean, have a chance to. I guess he'll compete with Morgan Moses potentially at right tackle, but really, he's gonna rep every day in practice. Tyron Smith doesn't practice. So you're going to play left tackle every day in practice, get all those reps, useful reps. And then eventually, I hope it doesn't happen, but the track record is what it is, that eventually one of those 33-year-olds is going to break down, and then he'll be the insurance and get on the field there. But I thought that was their decision there for them to make at that point in time. Let's take a quick break, guys, because I know we all want to get some bites at the apple here at pick number 8 with Michael Penix, the surprise pick of the draft going to the Atlanta Falcons. We'll get to that right after this. All right, Buck, I have not had a chance to hear your thoughts on this. Rhett as well. We haven't had a chance to visit. We've been running around like crazy. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on this thing. So, Bucky, why don't you go first here with Michael Penix going to the Falcons at 8?
Okay, so I'm going to say exactly what I said on TV. Good plan, questionable execution. Good plan in the means of, hey, I am all about the quarterback and making sure that we have a quarterback that can play. Regardless of the amount of money paid to Kirk Cousins, it is always good business to have a backup quarterback or a young quarterback in the hopper that can eventually take over. I would say the questionable execution would be, okay, if we really thought this was going to be a possibility, and we had to know this because free agency happened after the combine, so we had an opportunity to meet and see all the young quarterbacks out there. I don't know if we had to go and get the most expensive free agent quarterback on the market to do it. I'm just saying, like, so, and I know we can talk about salary cap percentage, and 45 million isn't what it used to be based on how much it escalated, but what you did and going to get Kirk Cousins and then coming to get Michael Penix, it just appears that you just don't know what your original plan was. And so I come from the Green Bay school of, hey, you get a quarterback, you have somebody, you always have somebody ready. This, though, is just different because the execution of the plan was so drastically different than any other plan that we've seen when it comes to having a succession plan in place. Tom Brady was not a top 10 pick to back up Drew, Drew Bledsoe. And then even with Tom Brady was there and they got quarterbacks, they didn't get quarterbacks in the first round. Now, I like Michael Penix, the player, and I like Kirk Cousins, the player. I'm just saying because this is so drastically different than anything that we've seen, it just takes us a while to get comfortable with the notion that you spent premier money to acquire a free agent quarterback and premier draft capital to get a quarterback, even though I support the plan. The execution to me is the question mark that everyone has to answer.
Yeah. Look, I think I can kind of see this from both sides of the coin. If that makes any sense. Like I kind of understand the logic to have a need and a want for quarterback continuity. I got to tell you, man, it takes some guts. Like if you're Terry Fontenot, because this is a guy we weren't quite sure was still going to be there to make this head coaching hire and to be a part of that search this year after the way things had gone the last 3 years. And now if you're talking 4 or 5 years down the road, like, I don't know if you get that much patience in this league anymore. And so I think it takes some guts to pull the trigger on a pick like that. And so I'll hat tip to that. And then look, especially for a defensive minded head coach and Raheem Morris, and that's obviously the place that we had been going. It's clear the league valued the defense a little bit lower down the board. And I think we kind of saw that manifest itself. I'd really be curious to see where Michael Penix was on that board. And whether the receivers, whether the offensive linemen, were all really close up there, or whether he was, that blinking light that we talk about at the top of a board. I understand. And look, I know the guaranteed money, DJ, with Cousins is, 2 years of guarantees essentially is where we're at. And so would it really be that egregious if you don't see Penix until year 3? The weird part is he feels like an NFL ready dude. That's the part that feels a little odd to me.
Okay, this makes no sense to me whatsoever. None. Like, it made little sense to me when it happened. And honestly, hearing all the reasons of why it makes sense, it makes less sense to me after having, had time to digest this. And I'll lay out a couple reasons for you here. Tell me I'll start with the first point here. Bucky, you mentioned it. You have all of the college football season. You have the run up to the combine. You get a chance to visit with these guys. No, not to mention the guy played in the Senior Bowl as well. So we've got a college season. We've got the Senior Bowl with the quarterbacks, looking at them there. Then you've got the combine. Who's picking in front of you. You know the number of picks. At any point in time through this process, was Michael Penix ever talked about being concerned that he would be gone before they would have picked at number 8? Never, not once was that discussed that he would be gone at that point in time. So if you were so in love with that, it would have been easy for you to say, okay, we'll keep the $40 million, or we're going to pay Kirk Cousins $100 million, whatever the number is, the guarantees. And we'll just be aggressive in this deep quarterback class. We like all these guys and we like Penix. We'll either get him there or we'll have to do what we do. We'll move up and get him, but let's get a placeholder in free agency. And, we can get one of these mid-tier guys, but you went and got the guy at the very tippy top of the market. So that's the first part of it that doesn't make any sense to me. But here's the next part. They went out and used as their explanation for this pick as the model for Green Bay. And I've heard that from a bunch of people saying, using that as the model. This is not even close to the same model. Brett Favre had been in Green Bay for over a decade. Brett Favre had won a Super Bowl. Brett Favre had won MVPs. Brett Favre had the locker room. Brett Favre had the city. He had the fans. He had everyone behind him. Aaron Rodgers, over a decade in Green Bay, won a Super Bowl, had this. They all know how good this guy is. He's got equity out the wazoo within the city, the organization, and the locker room. You give Kirk Cousins all this money, but Kirk Cousins has zero equity with his teammates. He probably hadn't even met half of his teammates. He has zero equity in the city. And now you just backstopped him with a top 10 pick. The first bad game, maybe it's the first bad throw, you're going to have the entire city clamoring for the guy behind him. And how is Kirk Cousins going to feel like he hasn't built up any kind of equity to be able to say, like, who cares? I've already done what I've done. All of his accomplishments they're numerous in terms of individually, none of them in Atlanta. So that's totally apples to oranges and puts him in a rough spot where the pressure, like there's a difference between motivation. Like, you pissed off Aaron Rodgers and you got 2 MVPs out of him. There's a difference between being pissed off and then being also uncomfortable. Like, you are making him in a very pressurized, like, I don't think Aaron Rodgers felt pressure. I think Aaron Rodgers was upset. Whereas Kirk Cousins is going to feel a tremendous amount of pressure. Oh, by the way, go ahead and learn a new offense and learn your new teammates and try and figure all that stuff out. And then now you've got it. Just to me, it sets up for what could be a real, tinderbox there that could explode. And then the other argument that I'll push back on, which was, well, we're such a good team, we'll never be picking up here again, so we better get our quarterback. And I say, well, you can't have both things. Like, you can't say that we don't want to have a drop off from Kirk Cousins before we get the next guy, but then we're never going to be picking this high. Those two things compete against one another. In other words, Kirk Cousins plays great for 2 years, and then maybe Kirk Cousins starts to dip. Well, once Kirk Cousins starts to dip, you are going to be picking that high, and you would have an opportunity to pick a quarterback. And oh, by the way, if you pick the quarterback 2 to 3 years from now, you'll get the full 4 or 5 year benefit of having a cheap starting quarterback to be able to fill out the rest of your roster. You're foregoing that now. At this pace, by the time he gets on the field, you're going to get 1 or 2 years of that benefit of having a cheap quarterback. That is it.
Yeah. The only way I can kind of like scrimmage this out is they must have had such an astronomical grade on Michael Penix that they were forced to do it if they were going to retain their credibility within the room with the scouts. Like, that's the only way that I could see it. That
How are they so late to that evaluation, Buck? How do they not come out of the Senior Bowl and say, hey, guys, we're going to go whatever we got to do? Four would have traded out. 5 would have traded out. Both those, like, if you I don't know.
I don't know, because, like, if we go by the normal timeline that we use when it comes to scouting, they should have known that he was going to be in play for them based on all of the stuff that was done ahead of the combine, because the combine happens before free agency. After you met with him, after you watched him work out, after you watched him at the Senior Bowl, after you've done all of his tape, you should have had a great awareness, like, woo, this guy's going to come in with, I'll just throw a mythical grade. He's going to come in at like a 7.4. Like, he is at the top of the charts. Like, we love him. We got to have him. To go through all of that and to go and get the top free agent. And this isn't even the same example, because I've heard Pete Carroll talk about this when they got Matt Flynn, but then they took Russell Wilson. He was like, the cost,
the money on those 2 deals.
I know,
Matt Flynn's number.
No. But I'm just saying. But at the time, he was like, the cost of doing business in free agency cannot impact who eventually plays and what you do in the draft. So when it comes to Kirk Cousins, that's not true, because Kirk Cousins has to play. And DJ, let's just talk about the dynamics of the city, and let's talk about the dynamics of the team. So now you have Kirk Cousins, an older quarterback, coming into the locker room. You got all these young playmakers in Bijan Robinson and Drake London and Kyle Pitts and all that. When Michael Penix, a younger player, walks into that room, it's going to be different, the connectivity. While they may respect Kirk Cousins, they're going to hang with Michael Penix. And so what can happen, the chemistry and connectivity could be vastly different. And so for Kirk Cousins, you talk about the pressure, and we haven't even talked about the elephant in the room. The pressure is on him coming off an Achilles. So now Kirk Cousins, when he's practicing, if he feels a twinge or anything, like, he can't just say, oh, I'm going to sit this one out, this and that. Like, if he gives the ball to Michael Penix, he may never get the ball back.
Mhm.
And so that's the thing. We all know in mini camps or whatever, it's just a different animal.
And I like Michael Penix, and I think I was lobbying. I was getting crucified for saying I thought the Raiders should have taken Michael Penix if he was there, and I kept putting him there. And people saying there's no way he's a second round player. You can't take him there. I'm like, no, he's better than all the quarterbacks that they have. Well, Kirk Cousins, and you can ask Kevin O'Connell about this, but like he felt like he was on his way to be an MVP last year if he doesn't get hurt. Like he was putting up huge numbers. I think that's a different quarterback room he's going into there than he would have been going into the Raiders. But I want to be careful because I do want to let you know, like I like Michael Penix. This is not a pro Cousins, anti Penix. This is just I just didn't understand. Like you could have done one, you could have done Cousins, or you could have done. Yeah, you could have done Cousins, all in on Cousins, or you could have said, we're going to wait and we're going to go Penix and we're all in on Penix. I think either one of those are plans I can get behind, I can be excited about. I think the two of them combined together, that's when I just don't, I have a hard time just figuring that one out.
Okay, so give me this. How could they ever make it right? Like, how could we look back at this decision in 3 or 4 years and say that the Atlanta Falcons got it right by doing it the way that they did it?
I would say that almost the same thing kind of happens. It's like, Cousins starts off the year on an absolute tear, and God forbid, but something happens, and then bam, Michael Penix comes in, and they still go to the postseason and win a couple of games, and like they don't have the quote unquote drop off that they've been trying to avoid. Whether that happens year 1 or year 2, that's the only scenario where I can see like where you're like, oh, thank God we did that, right? Whew. Thank God we got Penix when we still had Cousins rolling and playing really well.
Yeah. And the last thing on
and you don't wish that upon anybody.
No, of course not. And I hope that look, the perfect world is Kirk Cousins plays at an unbelievable high level for 2 years, and then Michael Penix takes the baton and it's just
wins 2 Super Bowls. Smooth
ride, and then Michael Penix is your quarterback for the next day. And I think that's what people have been championing is this is the plan. Perfect 2 years of Cousins and then off to the Michael Penix era. I'm just telling you, it doesn't always go that smoothly, and it could be a tough situation for a lot of people. And Buck, you nailed it with the young guys because and this is different from the standpoint even with Carson Wentz and Hurts, because people could look at that and say, well, aren't they glad they took Hurts because that worked out? And yes, it did. But Carson had already established himself there, was on his way to an MVP before he got hurt. They won a Super Bowl and blah, 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 blah. So even that, that was a situation in Philadelphia. Remember that? All the young guys, they had all those young receivers and they all went towards Hurts, which means picking Hurts wasn't the wrong thing. In hindsight, maybe you shouldn't have paid Carson Wentz, which is what we could be saying, a year from now is like, hey, look, Penix has done great and he's taken over and he's won the job. Well, then that's awesome. But then, man, you way overpaid. You shouldn't have done what you did with Kirk Cousins. Like, that's what I'm getting at. It's like, it's hard for both of these to be right. Like, it's going to be one or the other.
It'll be fascinating. What they've done is they've created a conversation around the team that will never go away. It won't go away. It's not going to go away for the next 3 or 4 years. So Raheem, Terry Fontenot, they have to be
as long as Kirk's there.
Yeah, they have to be comfortable living in the white noise. And even when Kirk isn't there, then all the pressure is on Michael Penix to do it because now he has to justify and validate why he was selected 8 and why they felt compelled to opt for another quarterback as opposed to the quote-unquote weapon to help Kirk Cousins. It just creates a conversation and a narrative that will not go away until they play, and they have to play really well.
So many layers to it. I mean, we could literally do hours and hours of all the different layers because we haven't even talked about the fact that we always talk about here, once you've paid the quarterback, you have to maximize your dollars. And the value of a top 10 pick is you get a premium player at a premium position for dirt cheap, which then you can use that savings. Instead of having to pay a pass rusher $25 million a year at a premier price, I can get a premier pass rusher and I'm paying him $8 million a year. Now I've got all that extra money that I can divvy up around the rest of my roster. Well, that's gone. They just put more money into the quarterback room there. So there's a million levels to it. But who knows? Maybe we'll all look back on it and it was I want to go down as one of the smartest moves in off-season history here. And well, at least I would have to apologize at that point in time.
New trend.
I have what's that? Was that Rhett? I didn't hear you.
I just said it'd be a new trend. A new trend.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. A new trend that has been set in place. So here's my post-draft analysis request. I know draft grades, they do huge clicks. Every place does them. I've had to do them in the past. I'm sure Bucky, you've had to do them. I don't know if Rhett, you've ever had to go down that path. I'm sure you might be doing them on Path to the Draft this week.
Did them today, baby.
Oh, it's the worst. So in lieu of that, how much more sense does this make? So instead of just pulling a letter grade out of your backside, how about what our buddy Jack Andrade has done in research, at least for me personally? I have my top 150 players. So he goes through and he puts a point value to it. The number 1 player on my board is worth 150 points. The number 150 player on my board is worth 1 point. So instead of me guessing and throwing an arbitrary grade out there, he literally tells me the teams that have the most total points in terms of who got the most value through the draft. So for me this year, it was the Cardinals, followed by the Commanders, the Steelers, the Bills, and the Eagles. So based off of my opinion, that's not like me guessing. Those are actually the numbers that are represented there. At least in my personal opinion, when I get asked who I thought had the best draft, I can confidently say, well, the Cardinals, the Commanders, the Steelers, the Bills, and the Eagles. Those are my top 5 drafts.
I mean, so let me go right. You already talked about the Cardinals, but let's talk about the Steelers, right? And the Steelers, we all have ties in that building. Yeah. I will say this, DJ, there is something about a team that drafts to the brand. And I feel like there were a couple years where the Steelers didn't necessarily draft to the brand. They're all the way back now. The one thing that shows up in all the players that they took, there's an innate toughness and physicality that shows up in all of the games. Even Roman Wilson, they play tough, hard-nosed ball. They fit in, and everything that you see on tape, I can watch the tape, and I can hear Mike Tomlin's voice talking about what he believes in when it comes to it. So when those things match up, that's when the really good stuff happens. So the Pittsburgh Steelers being back on track. You talk about the 3 offensive linemen that they took, McCormick, Frazier, and Fatana. Fatana. That all works. And then Peyton Wilson, look, I'm a favorite of, like, all of that stuff just kind of work. I can just see the Steelers being back on track because they drafted guys that fit the brand.
I love their draft. It was 3rd on my list, Rhett. But then if you were going to say who gets the bonus points for the identity, the Steelers. I mean, that's they tapped into who they are in a big way.
Yeah, 100%. I'll double down on that, and I'll give you one other team from beyond your list that I liked. So with the Steelers, starting to kind of notice a trend there, because we were sitting there on the draft broadcast. We were showing Zach Frazier absolutely mashing dudes, his face into the mat on the wrestling mat, right? Then they come back and they get Peyton Wilson, also a champion wrestler. And then in the 6th round, let me take it back. So I was texting with somebody in that building after they made the Wilson pick. I was like, yeah, you guys going to install a wrestling mat in the middle of the locker room? Watch these 2 guys get after it? And they were like, yeah, go all the way back to last year with Keanu Benton. And they were like, it's something we value. And then they come back and get Logan Lee, a 2-time high school state champion wrestler in the state of Iowa, in the 6th round. They're going to have a flipping battle royale in there each and every week during practice. Like, I'm like this. So we talk about basketball and other sports making a difference. With the Steelers, like, that toughness, that blue collar mentality, both mentally and physically, comes to play with how they want this team to look. So I love that. And I love the way that they kind of followed their blueprint. The Rams hadn't had a 1st round pick in almost a decade, right? Since 2016. They come on the clock, patiently sit, and they get, arguably, one of the best edge rushers in this class, right? There's some camps like our buddy Lance Zierlein had Jared Verse as his 5th overall player. Loved Jared Verse. Obviously, the Rams did as well. They took him at 19. And I love that they get to come back in the 2nd round and take his teammate Braden Fisk, both of whom transferred into Florida State from smaller programs, excelled at the higher level of competition, played really well together, and now get to do it. But the best part about it, DJ, is they tried to get Jared Verse to make the call to Braden Fisk to say that he was going to be a Ram, but he gets stuck in LA traffic. And so he just missed it, which I thought was pretty slick. And I love Blake Corum, fits what they do. I loved it all.
Yeah. No, they did a great job, man. I would also add, I was having a conversation with Howie Roseman, and we were talking about just the different philosophies and strategies when you're approaching the draft. And I just remember saying, look, there's different ways to look at it. You can spread all your resources around, or you can identify what is our biggest problem and ferociously attack it and say, we're going to attack our greatest weakness and we're going to solve that. Now we got not like aren't other problems elsewhere. We got to try and sort that out, but take a ton of resources and eliminate your biggest weakness. And their biggest weakness, we would all agree, you can look at all the numbers coming into it, was their secondary, and they were not good against the pass last year. So you go out and you get the other choice. They got the top corner in the draft, and Quinyon Mitchell was, they either could have taken him or Terrion Arnold. I don't think there was a wrong decision. I think Terrion was 9 overall for me. Mitchell was 12. And they're both elite players, elite competitors, elite makeup, all that stuff. So they get that. And then they come back as you start to see Cooper DeJean start to slide a little bit, and they're armed with those second-round picks, and they just get aggressive and go up and get them. So now you go from a secondary that's a major issue to now you bring back Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who's fit in well with your team and was great for them previously. Now I've got Cooper DeJean who can play in the nickel and be your big nickel, and is an excellent tackler as well. And now on the outside, I've got Quinyon Mitchell. They just freaking attacked their biggest weakness. And just like that, I think they not only turned it from not being a weakness, I think you can make a case that it's a strength. Like this turned out to be a really, really good secondary now.
And DJ, in essence, what they did is some of the strategies that we talked about. You double down a position of need. You just don't get one player; you get multiple players. And even though we can project Cooper DeJean as a nickel, he also can play corner. So you get 2 DBs, and then they came back and got a safety as well to go and attack it. But we've seen the Eagles do this before, like going all the way back when they did Lito Shepherd and Sheldon Brown and all those other guys. Like they have done this in the past. So hats off to them for being really, really aggressive in doing that. And the other thing that the Eagles tend to do, they tend to do it while they still have veterans in place that can play. So having Darius Slay still around to be able to mentor and kind of teach Quinyon Mitchell, to me, is important. We won't talk about this because it's not a draft thing, but I thought it was very creative and slick that they signed Mekhi Becton, kind of slide him in to the thing, because that
he's
seems
a
like
swing tackle for him. Yeah.
That's another Eagles type move, and then we'll look in awe if he plays really, really well. Like some teams just get it, and it appears that the Philadelphia Eagles just get it when it comes to putting together a roster.
Yeah, and if I was an offensive lineman who needed to rehab, I would go to Jeff Stoutland. So just as if, I was asked by somebody who had options. I don't even know how it ended up. I haven't looked at it, but it was an agent who had was going to have an undrafted quarterback, and he was giving me the long list of teams that they had options for, of which San Francisco was one of them. And I was like, well, yeah, send him to Shanahan. Like, that's no question. Like, who cares if he makes the team or not? Just touching the coat is going to help him out. Go out there and deal with him. Yeah, he's gonna get valuable instruction there. And then also you have the point that people are like, okay, if he's been touched by him, like, okay, he's got a big tree now. Shanahan's got a big tree, and if he's not good enough to make their roster, you can help him out somewhere else. But I think, to me, you have to know, if you are not going to get a starting job, go where they're going to help you, man. Go where they're going to be able to develop you and get you right. So I thought actually that was a smart move by Mekhi Becton to go to Philly. Anything else, you guys? We're running up against it here at the end of the time. Rhett, Buck, any other final thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, like there were other teams, we kind of mentioned it, that doubled down on on position groups. We talked about the Steelers with Fatanu and Frazier. Raiders did it with Jackson Powers Johnson, which we thought was a pretty damn good value for a guy that could have been a first rounder if things had fallen the right way. And then they come back and get Delmar Glaze after getting Brock Bowers in the first round. Something I don't think I read a single mock that had Brock Bowers going to the Raiders at 13, but what a damn good player that's going to be for him to utilize. So I think about little like things that we didn't necessarily see projected anywhere as always kind of fun nuggets to see how it ended up that was something. Yeah.
I think the wide receivers at the bottom of the first round were intriguing in terms of where they went. The one that's most intriguing to me, I think people are using the incorrect comp when they talk about Xavier Worthy going with Andy Reid. They keep throwing up Tyreek Hill, but I want them to think about Deshaun Jackson in Philadelphia and how Andy Reid used Deshaun Jackson being a punt returner and explosive playmaker, and just the amount of plays that Deshaun Jackson made in Philadelphia for Andy Reid. I think that's more the comparison than, he's going to do what Tyreek Hill did. Different style player, more similar to Deshaun Jackson as a vertical threat playmaker.
Yep. That was fun. And then I also thought it was interesting with some of the fits we thought for players in the first round. If they didn't go that route, it was interesting to see them get a similar facsimile of the player later on. Like the Falcons, we thought maybe they take Murphy, the DT from Texas. Well, they don't, but then they end up getting Dorless, I think in the third round. Yeah. Well, they got Ororo then to me, but Ororo's that's not the Murphy style player. Dorless is that real upfield guy. So they got a little knockoff version of that. I talked about the 49ers trying to get their version of a Tank Dell, and maybe Xavier Worthy could be their Tank Dell. Same offense they run in Houston. Kyle could really use this toy. Well, they don't get Tank Dell, but they end up getting the kid from Arizona and Jacob Cowing, who's again undersized flyer, receiver. So that to me it's always interesting when you have, man, I know what I have a real good feel that they want this type of a player, but they have to decide that they want the premium one, or are they willing to go down and take in the same category, but maybe it's a third or fourth round, a little knockoff version of the same type of player. All right, guys, this has been fun. Yeah. We're going to take a little bit of a break here. So we'll have a little bit of a pause on the podcast, but I do appreciate everybody hanging with us here, and appreciate Buck, you and Rhett keeping this thing rolling during a real busy, hectic week. So appreciate all you guys. And I'll hopefully catch up with you guys soon, and we'll catch up with the audience here after we take a little pause here. But we've had a blast. It's been a great draft season. Appreciate you so much, and we'll see you next time right here on Move the Sticks.